Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. So, introductions, questions, comments, concerns, show ideas. Feel free to reach out to me, and those links will be provided for you in this episode. All right, so some of the audio platforms that I'm on Spreaker, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, just to name a few. So it's Friday, and I am going to focus my attention on all you listeners out there. And then, as I said, until I get to the next step, I'm focusing on fashion. So, not out of the UK. This week is Australia. Here we go. Okay, so here we go. Here is some AI-generated facts, and I'm going to give my thoughts, after this, and then expand on the facts, summarize everything. All right, so Australian fashion history. So the history of Australian fashion is marked by significant changes and influences over the years. In the 90s and early 2000s, Australian fashion experienced a boom with designers like Alana Hill, Alice McCall, and Sasson Bide gaining international recognition. However, the industry faced challenges as global fast fashion brands like H&M and Zara, to name a few, entered the Australian market, leading to a decline of local manufacturing and the closure of many local garment factories. Australian fashion has also been shaped by its unique cultural and environmental context. Traditional attire reflects indigenous and colonial influences, with practical design suited to the harsh Australian environment, such as wide-brim hats for sun protection and durable fabrics for the outback. The wool industry played a vital role in the Australian economic development, and the wool became the primary export commodity. In recent years, the Australian fashion history has seen a shift towards sustainability and slowness, with designers focusing on smaller scales and eco-friendly practices. Despite these challenges, some Australian brands continue to thrive internationally, particularly in niche markets like beachwear and resort wear. Alana Hill, known for her whimsical aesthetic with an edgy twist, her designs were worn by celebrities like Nicole Kidman and Helena Christensen. Colette, excuse me for pronunciation, Denegan, the first Australian designer to showcase her collection at Paris Fashion Week in 1996. Her delicate lace dresses and couture craftsmanship gained international acclaim. So, Akira Ogaya, forgive me for that pronunciation. She is a Japanese. Well, I'm sorry, not she. Sorry. He is a Japanese-born Australian designer with a blend of Japanese and Western aesthetics, which has been showcased biannually in Paris since 1998. That's quite an accomplishment there. So Sasson Bide. Founded by Heidi Middleton and Sarah Jane Clark, the brand design is the philosophy and the emphasis of empowerment and expressiveness. So Australian fashion has a rich history, blending cultural heritage with contemporary influences, and continues to evolve with a focus on sustainability and unique Australian sensibility. All right, so I'm going to get into my thoughts. Here we go. Okay, so my thoughts about the history of Australian fashion here. It is really something else when the culture is centered around producing material that is appropriate for the environment in which they live in. And so that in itself creates the aspects of a deeper understanding of the clothes you wear, because you are, metaphorically, but literally what you're wearing. And the environment is the impact of it. So what I mean by this is, Australian outback, particularly with the harsh environment, and then being able to make a civilization there, being able to be comfortable in the environment in which you live in, your clothes really play a huge role in that. And you have to be, it forces you to be very aware of that process. So the aspects of, fashionable notions of what you're wearing, that comes later when everything is all said and done, and people are pretty much in a position to where they don't have to worry about the survival of getting through the elements and just in that survival mode. Because when you are constantly in that state, you don't have the time, or it's not important leisure, that is. It's just not a concept, because you're constantly thinking about how to protect yourself, how to protect your land, and so forth. And out of that, I think a great deal of respect comes from understanding the upkeep or the sustainability, as is the category of subject about these things. Really understanding the importance of taking care of your environment and understanding how to make it, appropriate to where you can actually live and survive. And I think that's another means to get people to understand the difference in having an appreciation for what they wear, but also how that translates to other generations to understand what the heritage of where they come from. And that is really neat when there's cultures, where there's countries, culture, and within the countries, the cultures that really want to preserve that notion of you must protect your land. You must remember this. You must instill this into other generations. And to really mean it, not to be like pseudo, it's unfortunate, particularly in American culture where, we're, particularly young influencers, they say, this whole aspects of oh, we must protect our environment, and we must this, and we must that. And you're bad if you don't understand the concepts of eco-friendly, matters of protecting our land. Most of the time, they don't really care, and most of the ways in which they live their lives personally is not very eco-friendly. And I think a really good example of that is Al Green when he started the initiative about, global warming and everything. He was going on and on and on and on about how our state of affairs and of our land is really troubling. And he really put up the big guns by getting celebrity endorsement and all these things, and then the inconvenient truth really, slapped the label on everything, all the aspects of talking about, economic affairs here. Well, not economic affairs. Eco affairs, environmental affairs. Which is funny because there's a lot of economic profitability in saying and shouting, global environmental stability, and just being the front person or front man, hype man for it, but you don't really, believe in the issues that are within environmental changes. And then, you can, it's just, this is my opinion here. Everybody has different opinions. That's the way of the world, But, it's just one of those things. If you're a person with common sense and everything else, you state the obvious. With Al Gore, it was obvious that he was just saying these things in order to get exposure and to, have some political clout in the matter. And, when other scientists or other people had different opinions about the aspects of global environmental changes and the impact that it has on us economically, it was to just, you're part of the problem. It was never wanting to actually sit down and be civil about the matter. And that says a whole lot too. But to wrap up, I think it's very neat, and I really appreciate countries, cultures that truly understand the importance of being resourceful, and then that lies in the culture and ingredients and the fashion aspects of what they think about themselves and how they use clothing in order to move about in their society. It's really something else. All right, so now I'm going to get into some more facts about the aspects of Australian fashion. And I'm going to summarize, talk about things that I found out and discovered, and then read more in depth about it. Here we go. Okay, so it's quite interesting, with the aspects of Australian fashion. It started out with people trying to survive and trying to do with, we're really trying to survive in the environments in which they lived in, and then being very conservative in the aspects of what they were wearing, particularly with women and so forth. And that goes without saying, man being conservative, because, that's expected. But around, when we get into the Gilded Age and we get into the earlier part of the 20th century, establishing the Industrial Revolution and so forth, women in Australia were still in the aspects of wearing clothes that has to do with, that's appropriate for what they were doing for, agricultural purposes. It wasn't for fashion forward or anything like that. It was very unassuming, very sturdy, and very utilitarian in the aspects of what they were wearing. But it was feminine at the same time. It was appropriate that it was established that, these are women's clothing, but they just weren't flashy or anything like that. With the aspects of flash and luxury and moving forward and all of these notions of of women's fashion, that started really making a lot of headlines, from what I understand, and what I was reading, gathering, towards the really, really becoming its own towards the 50s. And before I get into that, it's quite interesting, in Australia, going on, and when the gold rush was happening and everything, and the sort of attire that women and men were wearing, it was very appropriate. It's still a testament of grit and will and being more modernized, but, establishing that aspect of moving forward to more modernity, more advanced civilizations within their culture. But that's a stark juxtaposition to the Aborigines and to their way of thinking, their way of life, and then merging those two worlds together. And then that's what's really unique, I think, about Australia. Despite the... Now, I'm just speaking from my point of view here, despite the cultural landscape of what's going on today socially, a lot of really outrageous progressive movements in order to, stabilize the country and the citizens within the country. But it just is also, again, nice that when you see cultures that still try to, despite the issues, they still try to have respect and appreciation of their heritage, and particularly with the Aborigines, and how that, translates to the impact of the cultural map, where, as people who are not Aborigines descent, and the people who are Aborigines descent, who want to be part of the city life and everything, the ones that still pay and remember their heritage, there's something to be said about that. And so, okay, enough said on that here. So, and when we get into, like I was saying, when the 50s, it was really establishing its own, about the aspects of high luxury fashion with Australian women. And that was really felt that throughout the globe, and, even very, very much so in America. And so it's quite interesting, all these fashion houses started to pop up during this time. You get Christian Dior, you get Givenchy, you get a lot of heavy hitters coming out of France, coming out of starting to establish their own in Italy and so forth, just moving, expanding out, and then going and influencing other cultures. And so women, Australian women, went with started to be, life was more comfortable, so they had the means and the reasons to catch up and to pay attention to fashion trends. And, and as the years went on, all the way to now, it was very prevalent. That was shown a lot in the way Australian fashion moved forward. And then, now I think that music and fashion go hand in hand. And, particularly in the 80s, wow, that was a cultural landscape with how it was so fashion forward to, have Australia was really on the map with the social cultural aspects of Australia. It was really very, very, very popular, and then you could see it everywhere. It was on in mainstream culture, film, television, and it was very explosive with music. And the most mainstream band that really, paved the way. Well, it was a lot of them, but it's they were really, really on the map here with Men Without Hats and just that whole Outback Swat Aviv that they had with everything. And even though it was quite interesting too with the aspect of new wave and Australian bands. They paved a different outlet. They made a different outlet with the aspects of music and Australian culture. And I think Icehouse was really a really good example of that, particularly when they made the song Great Southern Land. They were talking about the aspects of taking your land and so forth. Now, it didn't make as big as a hit as Men Without Hats, but it is something they made their own in their own way. And it's INXS really it was quite unique with a band like that. They were from Australia, but they merged so many different sounds together to where, you took recognition of that. And again, the Australian aspect of culture, became more and more popular, even more popular. Excuse me just a minute. And so, I'll say this again. It's I guess one of those things that can be a curse or it can be not a curse depending on the perspective and particularly it depends on the elements of the situation. But a band like the Vinyls, they contributed so much more to the aspects of, especially with Australian rock and then the female rock. When it comes to a band like that, they're in a certain company, they're only known for that one song, I Touch Myself. But they were in themselves very quintessential rock, Australian rock, and they put in a new outlet about the aspects of what Australia is contributing in the elements of all of that. And that's very interesting. All right, so enough said on that. I am going to get in here and to some of the aspects about Australian in the clothing line here. So here we go. Okay, if it'll let me pull it up. All right, so as I was saying, says no, I'm gonna start from to reiterate what I was saying. So Australian clothing in 1900. So popular clothing in 1900 was very covered with a long sleeve blouse and a long skirt covering all skin apart from the face, which is quite understandable because, you know, you're trying to protect your body from the elements in which they were living in. All right, so 2010. Sorry, this is 1900 and 1910. So clothing stayed mostly the same with no major changes. Still, covered skin were conservative. So moving on to the 20s. And again in the 30s. So the 20s, it was still very conservative and very, you know, not very revealing as far as dresses. But when we move on to the 30s, that's when it started to change. So clothes became even shorter, with women wearing skin-colored tights, causing an outrage with men wearing sports-themed clothes. Now on to the 40s. Dresses became knee-length with tighter tops, mainly styled with a hat. So as I was saying about the 50s, dresses were now just above the knees. They were fluffy in the skirts, but tight in the top, sometimes styled with a belt. So moving on to the 60s, dresses became even shorter and tighter, and the main fashion was either one color or a pattern of different colors. On to the 70s. So pants were introduced as a more popular style for women, with usually flare at the bottom. That's quite interesting. You know, with this, you know, it started becoming its own in the 70s, you know, more appropriate for women to wear pants. But it's a testament to the American aspects of women and culture when you would see girls and women starting to wear jeans and everything as early as the 50s and so forth. And then even before then in the 40s with the war effort, with the utilitarian clothes, you know, you get Rosa the Riveter and stuff, images like that. And then that is another element that is how prevalent and how impactful and how important and vital women are to the American culture and aspect, even despite the narrative. You know, those change the elements to where people who make these talking points, they really have nothing left to say when you just eloquently remind them of these things. You know, women had a lot of say, more say than what is depicted. You know, of course, there's a lot of harsh reality in the history of American culture, but you have to really take the good and understand the bad and learn from it, and that's something to say. All right, so here we go. Moving on to the 80s. It says leg warmers, headbands, and tight leggings and flamingo, you know, neon type colors were the trendsetters in the 80s. So rock and roll and pop were the big music influencers that reflected into clothing styles. And Olivia Newton-John, she really put everything on the map, you know, even before then in the 70s. But, you know, when the Let's Get Physical music video, and then everything else, she really paved the way about the aspects of making Australia even more mainstream here. All right, so in 1990, so dialing down from the 80s, denim and patterns were the main trends, along with the tucking in the skirt and the jeans. You know, it was more grunge, it was more aspects of that and so forth. So I am going to, and it's quite interesting with the aspects of Australian fashion of today, that it's more, again, understanding the sustainability of where clothes are coming from, but on the aspects of being efficient with how you produce the material and the fashion forward aspects of elements of ready to wear, and then slowing that pace down and getting back to actually getting out of the element of just producing content, producing material left and right, left and right, and left and right, and left and right, and trying to get back to the mentality of what clothes are about, and to have more of a efficient approach, again, to not being so wasteful in the aspects of making clothing. That's something to say too. All right, so I'd like to know all of your thoughts. I will, of course, like I always provide, and list all of the aspects for you and the outlets for you to reach out to me. All right. Tune in, turn up, and absolutely take care. This reaches the end of the Harping Light. Bye-bye now.